are talking vampire bats. This is a 2005 movie directed by Eric Bross. And this one stars Lucy Lawless as a kind of university lecturer who is talking about biology and kind of environmental issues. Now, believe it or not, this is actually a sequel to another 2005 movie called Locusts. So I assume they kind of made these movies back to back, and it features there's the same character that kind of Lucy Lawless plays in both films, along with her kind of like on-screen husband. And they actually do reference the Locust story in this movie. So it is actually a sequel, albeit about a different kind of subject matter. Although it is, once again, nature on the loose. So we have a small American town where Lucy Lawless's character and her husband are both kind of university or college lecturers. And they're both in kind of the sciences. And this town is besieged by mutant vampire bats that seem to be particularly kind of aggressive and have mutated mouths to have more fangs. And not only that, if you get bitten, if they don't kill you outright, you'll actually end up getting rabies. So this proves to be quite the threat, and it's up to Lucy Lawless and a handful of others to try and find a way to defeat the vampire bats. What'll happen? Well, you're going to have to watch the movie to find out. So let's talk about vampire bats. So this is a made-for-TV movie that I have to say I actually thought was not too bad. Let me tell you what I think works first of all in this film. Now, TV movies about kind of like genre films tend to be kind of quite low budget, and that is true with this film. And sometimes the effects can be a little bit ropey. But I think the fact that we have a mix here of practical bat puppets and also kind of CGI. And I gotta say, I didn't think the effects were too bad here. I think the bats lend themselves, because they're kind of swooshing around kind of very quickly and are nocturnal, so a lot of the kind of the sequences are in the dark. Even when we're kind of seeing CGI bats, I didn't think the bats looked too bad. And the actual practical puppets do look very good, I have to say. Really, really good, in fact. There are a few instances where I think the CGI effects, when they're in lighter scenes, there's a scene towards them where they're in like a tunnel, which has kind of got like white steam in it, and then the kind of the CGI bats look very obvious. But when it's kind of in the dark and stuff, and they're kind of like flying by at high speed, I actually didn't think the kind of the CGI was all that bad. The film actually does have an environmental message, which is quite good, but I didn't feel it was too preachy, which is always a kind of a bonus. And I have to say here, I really enjoyed the characters. I like the fact that our main protagonist, played by Lucy Lawless, you know, she's got young kids, she's married, she's got a kind of a sister-in-law who's a bit of a pain in the arse, and but she kind of like, you know, just has this kind of quite real believability about her character and her kind of her family, with kind of like real worldly kind of like feel to it and kind of real world problems. And I actually quite liked her kind of relationship with her sort of students, because, you know, they're initially sort of students that kind of are, you know, don't really want to be there. They want to do anything else other than be in college or school or whatever. They want to be out partying. But I actually quite like the relationship, and when their obviously lives are affected by the bats and stuff, I actually thought that was quite good, and the way their characters were believable. You know, I still quite enjoyed the kind of the relationships. The movie does introduce a kind of a non-bat kind of antagonist kind of story as well, which they tend to do in these things. And I quite like the fact there's actually somewhat of a mystery and almost a misdirect about where that was kind of going, which was actually sort of quite good. And, you know, ultimately it was quite a fun and enjoyable film. I think mainly down to Lucy Lawless' very likeable kind of character and quite an interesting setup. But it doesn't ever go too far in the kind of the over-the-top sort of manner of things. It never really kind of overexerts itself and tries to do things that are too outlandish, and keeps they're slightly mutated bats. They're slightly more kind of like, you know, aggressive than they would normally be, but it's not too bad. It's still kind of in the realms of believability. And I just have to point out here, there's no actual vampires here. We are just talking about the bats, of which there's been plenty of kind of bat movies, you know, dotted around from the last kind of couple of decades, and you know, there you go. But here we are. But what doesn't work, ultimately, because it is a TV movie, it does feel very neutered. There's little gore here, and no kind of like things like, you know, a lot of swearing. So the film does have that kind of TV feel to it. Some of the kind of the edits and the transitions as well feel again like, you know, they're kind of they're pausing for commercial breaks and things like this. So some of the edits, when you're watching it as a kind of a film as a whole, feel a little bit kind of artificial, and it still does have that kind of that TV feel to it. I think the basic storyline is the standard kind of Jaws template, you know, where you discover that there is this animal kind of threat out there, and of course the mayor doesn't want to know anything about it, and he kind of doesn't want to affect the economic growth of the town and all of that. So it's pretty much the kind of the same basic template as, you know, Jaws had, and then a lot of kind of these animal attack films have kind of like copied and just built on top of ultimately. But it doesn't really kind of break the mold in regards to plot or storytelling. When the kind of the non-bat antagonist, the human antagonist is revealed, I don't know if I fully bought that reveal and what happens with that kind of person. It just seemed a little bit out the blue, and there was no evidence that the person or persons in question would act like that. It kind of, I don't know if I was completely, but that's the one thing where I think the story just went into really kind of fairly unrealistic kind of territory. And to be honest with you, you know, the bats aren't on screen loads. It is more of a procedural, so to speak, about, you know, finding the evidence, finding a way with lots of kind of dialogue kind of sequences. Again, because it's a TV movie, it can't afford to have, you know, loads of effects. I mean, there's a reasonable amount, but it's not, you know, they're not kind of like constantly kind of being invaded by bats and stuff like that. There's only a few kind of sequences here and there in the movie. However, for a TV movie, I would say I did quite enjoy this one. I actually thought it was quite well made. Lucy Lawless, I think, was actually really good in the role here. And for the most part, I think the kind of the bat effects worked really well. And it was quite an engaging and fun storyline, albeit not particularly original. I'll give this one a 6 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.